Mem Hey Amid Aleph. The Mishnah was talking about muktzah, candles, candelabras, whether you're allowed to move them on Shabbos or not. These would be, this was a three-way machlokas between the Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Meir, and Rabbi Shimon, and whether or not there was muktzah machmas mius, whether the concept of something being mo'us, being disgusting, and therefore not having another use on Shabbos, and so therefore it's going to be muktzah, or only if it was actually lit that Shabbos. So there's a muktzah machmas iser, there's a prohibition on it at the onset of Shabbos, or as Rabbi Shimon says, only at the time that it is currently lit is when there's going to be a prohibition, because then there's huksel mitzvasa, it was dedicated for the mitzvah, and there's a question of benefiting from it or moving it, as we discussed a couple of days ago from Tues. So today we're going to see a little bit more about the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which we said that Rabbi Shimon has, even though the Gemara says multiple times that lesle muksa, he doesn't have the concept of muksa. What it really means is he has a limited concept of muksa. The muksa in each one of those cases he does not hold up. So the Gemara had said that Rav would follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that there is muksa. Now the Gemara is going to challenge that. So we are about 6 lines in on Daf Mem Hey Amid Aleph. V'Rav Rabbi Yehuda Svirle. Does Rav really follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that there is muktzah in a broader sense on Shabbos? This question was asked of Rav. Mahu leteltuli shraga b'chanukta mikami chavre b'shabsa. The chavre we've seen many times. Chaverim, they were a group of invaders that invaded Persia and essentially brought their tyrannical ways into the government there, and they had very strict religious boundaries on Bnei Israel and didn't allow for candles in the home at the time that there were church services going on, and as such, they would sometimes come in and to the Jewish homes and take away their Shabbos candles. Similarly, so Shabbos usually was indoors in their table, wasn't such a problem. But with Hanukkah, where it was at the doorway, they would come and take it away. So the question was, is someone allowed to remove their Shabbos candles, which had already gone out? So they lit, the Hanukkah candles, and they lit their Hanukkah candles in the evening. It's already out. And now they have the candelabra sitting at the door, and they're afraid that the chavre are going to come and take it away, and so they want to bring it in. And there's a danger. It's not a danger to life, but a danger that they're going to break into their home to get things on Shabbos. So the question is, are you allowed to move it? V'amalu shaper dami, and they said, yes, you're allowed to. So second. So he said that you're allowed to move it. Now this candle, at the onset of Shabbos, it was in use, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be at least muktzah machmas iser. As we saw, Rabbi Yehuda also has the concept of muktzah machmas iser, which means that since at the onset of Shabbos you could not move these candles on account of that there was a iser, a prohibition on it to move it, because you'd be extinguishing or igniting the flame that's in that candle. So if you couldn't move it at the onset of Shabbos on account of a prohibition, that's a muktzah machmas iser. There's a prohibition of moving it at the onset of Shabbos. At the onset of Shabbos, it was set aside not to be moved. And Rabbi Yehuda says that this applies. The same would go for this Hanukkah candle. And as such, how could he have moved it? How could he say that you're allowed to move it? So the Gemara says, shasat chakshain. That's not a proper. That's not a typical situation. That situation is a shasat chak. It's a duress. It's pressure. It's fear of the government coming into your place and taking your things, and so therefore, for muktzah, he allowed to rely on Rabbi Shimon. Now, Amalei Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi l'Rav, because we see Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi, they actually ask Rav, Hachi Hilchasa, is that really the halacha that you're allowed to move a muktzah candlestick on Shabbos? Amar Lahu, and he said to them, Kedayu Rabbi Shimon l'smech alav shasat chak. Yes, indeed, Rabbi Shimon is worthy of relying upon in a time of pressure, in a time of need. And even though that the ikra halacha, that mainly we say the halacha is not like this, and you're not allowed to rely on Rabbi Shimon in regards to muktzah, that we are strict, and anything that at the beginning of Shabbos you could not dedicate for usage because it was prohibited to use, remains muktzah for the rest of Shabbos. You could rely on Rabbi Shimon in regards to a shasat chak, which would be such a case. Reish Lakish asked the question of Rabbi Yochanan. Chitim shazorim bekarka. We have seeds that you've placed in, that you've seeded into the ground, or beitzim shetachas tarnagolos, or eggs that are placed beneath a hen to warm them and incubate them. Now, what's the halacha in regards to muktzah? We're trying to define, according to Rabbi Shimon, what are the limits to muktzah? And here we're going to see the distinction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And when we say that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have, Rabbi Shimon doesn't have muktzah, it means this. Rabbi Shimon says that you don't have to have predetermined something as usable. As long as it is not specifically made unusable for Shabbos, there wouldn't be a muktzah. So the Gemara says, "Mao ki lesle Rabbi Shimon muktzah." When do we say that Rabbi Shimon says there's no muktzah? If you didn't specifically push it aside with your hands, actively make it not usable for Shabbos. But if you specifically, prior to Shabbos, made it non-usable, that is muktzah. Or do we say no distinction?
Could you give an example?
Follow muktzah. 1 second. And so that what we're saying is that when you take a seed and you put it in the ground, even if it did not yet start rotting and decomposing in order to become the plant that you were hoping for, and now you want to take that out to eat in Shabbos, you said, you know what, I'm hungry, I'm going to go out into the field and I'm going to start taking out the seeds that I had thrown down on the ground to plant them. No, there was a muktzah. Does Rav Shimon say, no, it's muktzah, you yourself specifically made it, designated it for something other than a usable Shabbos food. You set it aside, and therefore it's going to be muktzah. Or do we say no distinction? That's the question to try and define the limits of where Rabbi Shimon says muktzah. Yes, Michael, what was the question?
Thanks, you answered it. Okay. But so if he put a sack of wheat aside in his room and said, you know what, that's my wheat for seed. That's my seed wheat this year.
No, that's not a question because it's still edible.
Right. So we would say, Reb Shimon would say that's not muktzah.
Correct.
But when he put it through it and he used it as a different use than food, that's the question. Is that designated muktzah? Right.
We will see concepts of where you set something aside for sale. Because there I don't want to touch it because I want it to be a high quality. I don't want people to maneuver it and handle it and take it, or because it's set aside for sale. That's something else. But where I set it aside for myself, even if I intended to use it for seed, that's not going to be a muktzah. But the question is, will you actually put it in the ground? Is that going to be muktzah? Amar Leisi said to me, muktzah Rabbi Shimon el Shemen shebener b'shashu u'daylik. Ha'el v'huksel mitzvasa v'huksel li'isura. So he says, no, Rabbi Shimon only has a muktzah in shemen shebener, in the oil that's in the candle, in the candelabra, and specifically because because as we'll see, there's a vav there, and that there's a double set aside. He set it aside for a mitzvah, for the Shabbos candles, and for the prohibition, meaning because at the onset of Shabbos, I'm not allowed to extinguish this flame anymore. So I cannot move it on account of that it's prohibited, and I cannot move it on account of that it's a mitzvah. So the Gemara challenges, V'lesle huksel mitzvah is dedicated for a mitzvah not enough for muksa, according to Rabbi Shimon? Isn't that enough, having set it aside specifically for non-use? Vatanya, we learned in the Brisa, sichacha kilchasa. You made a sukkah as is appropriate, with the proper covering. V'itra, and you want to adorn it, so you adorn it b'karamim or b'sadinim or mitzuyarim, with cloths and kerchiefs that are painted. V'tolabeh goizin afarsakin shkedim erimonim, you hung fruits and nuts in there, so walnuts and peaches and almonds and pomegranates, and clusters of grapes, vater shel shibolim, and crowns, wreaths made of wheat stalks. Yena shmonim siltas. You hung glass jars of wine, oil, and flour. Also, this topic, man, you're not allowed to use any of these adornments ad matzah yantiv achra, until after yantiv. Whether, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's until the last day or until after the last day. Either way, but throughout yantiv, I'm not allowed to take some grapes off of there and just eat it. However, if you made a condition, you said, I'm putting this up as adornments, but if we get hungry, then we get guests, then we're going to take it down and feed them with it. And whatever condition you made is going to work. Now, that clearly states that huktzil mitzvah, so you dedicated these grapes or these fruits or these nuts for the mitzvah of adorning the sukkah, noi sukkah, and you're not allowed to use it the rest of the chag. And Gemara says, I'm a maider Rabbi Shimon. And how do you know that that's according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? Maybe that's according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says muktzah. The Tani Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef Kamed Rabbi Yochanan in Eitlin Eitzim and Asukah B'Yantiv Elam and Asamachla, because we see that Rabbi Yosef said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, you're not allowed to take boards from a fallen hut. You have a hut, and the hut collapsed, and you need some wood. So you're allowed to take wood from them. So he says, no, you're not allowed to take wood from a sukkah on Yantif. Elam in Asamachla, only from woods that were not part of the hut prior to Yantif, and therefore they were never set aside for this hut. But Rabbi Shimon says, no, even a collapsed hut would. So what if at the beginning of Yantif, this gazebo, this hut was there? Since it's now fallen, you can use the wood because you didn't specifically set it aside for non-use. However, they both agree that if this hut, what we're talking about is actually a sukkah, the mitzvah sukkah, and not just a hut, mishavin, b'sukkah sachag b'chag, that if it's a mitzvah hut, the actual sukkah on sukkahs, shehiyasura, there the woods would be prohibited because you dedicated it for the mitzvah for the rest of chag, and therefore you can't use it. So we see that Rabbi Shimon makes a distinction. Rabbi Shimon himself makes a distinction between just a hut and wood that was dedicated for the mitzvah sukkah, that since it was dedicated for the mitzvah, you may not use it throughout the entire chag, even if the sukkah collapsed. Again, if you did make a condition, you said, I'm building the sukkah for the first 3 days of Chag, and then I'm going to take it down, I'm going to use it for something else, also it's permissible. So in any case, so why do you tell me that Rabbi Shimon needs both, that the candles are prohibited, the oil, in the candle for Shabbos are going to be prohibited on account of that it has a mitzvah and a prohibition. Mitzvah itself seems to be a reason for Rabbi Shimon. So he says, you're right. What it means to say is, like, he only says a prohibition of muktzah in something that's similar to the candle, in the oil in the candle. Since you've dedicated it for the mitzvah, and you can't take it out from the mitzvah on account of the prohibition, so the entire time that it's prohibited to remove the oil, on account of that, if you take some out, you're extinguishing the flame. That means the entire time, that duration of that time that you're not allowed to take it out, it's dedicated for the mitzvah, and therefore you're not allowed to benefit from it. So we see that Rabbi Shimon holds that there is a muktzah on account of huksa l'mitzvah. So you've dedicated something for the mitzvah in a manner that you cannot take it out. That remains dedicated to the mitzvah. It is a huksa b'yadayim. You've set it aside with your intent by hand. You actively set it aside for non-use during the duration of that mitzvah. You're not allowed to benefit from it at that point. So we have the first muktzah definition according to Rabbi Shimon, which is where you set it aside actively for a mitzvah. Itmar nami. We have another statement. Like we said, since it's set aside for the mitzvah, in the duration of time that you can't take it out because of the prohibition, that is a muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says that there's another muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. Ein muktzah Rabbi Shimon ela geroigros v'tzimukim bilvad. There's a muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon only in something like grapes and figs that are set out to dry. It's not. It's only grapes and figs and nothing else. But Tani, we learned, but we have a brisa that says a little bit broader than that. He's eating figs, and there's some left. He puts it on the roof. To make dried figs. He's eating grapes. And there's extra. So he puts it on the roof to make raisins. He may not eat from them on Shabbos unless he specifically dedicated some to be eaten on Shabbos. And the same would be with peaches, and the same would be with quince, or any other fruit. You put them up on the roof to dry. You're not allowed to eat from them on Shabbos. You're not allowed to take it on Shabbos, and essentially it's muktzah unless you specifically designate some to be taken. Mani. Now, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Yehuda. If we're saying it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who's much broader in muktzah. Well, even if you didn't actively set it aside before Shabbos, you didn't actively put it into a place that they're going to start shriveling and need time to dry, yet he says muktzah. For sure, where you actively put it on the roof, it's going to be muktzah. Do I need to teach you that? Elalav Rabbi Shimon. Must be that this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and yet you see that it's broader than just grapes and figs. And what says Rabbi Yehuda? No, perhaps this is only the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And yet, why did the Brisa need to tell us that it's considered muktzah according to him? Because you were in the middle of eating them before you set it on the roof. So perhaps you're already eating them fresh. So even though you put them on the roof to dry, but if you decide to continue eating them fresh and you take some down, it would not be muktzah, because after all, you already were eating them as fresh fruit. Since you were eating them as fresh fruit beforehand, so you don't need a special designation before Shabbos, say, oh, I'm going to continue eating some of these as fresh fruit, even though I put them on the roof to dry. Kamash Malan, that's why this Brisa teaches us that once you put them on the roof, that's a haktzah b'yadayim, that will be muktzah, even though you are already eating them as fresh fruit. Once you put them on the roof, you change your mind, you stop thinking of them as fresh fruit, and therefore it's no longer edible or considered a part of your usable things for Shabbos. Reb Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of the Mishnah. So Rabbi Shimon, his son, asked him, Rebbe, now we turn to Mem Hey Amud Beis. Patzile Tamra, Rabbi Shimon Mao. Early, they would sometimes harvest dates early in the season when they were still not fully ripe. And they would put them in wicker baskets in order to ripen. And now you have some dates in these wicker baskets waiting to ripen. And you decide you want to eat some on Shabbos. Are you allowed to take them, or are they huktzah? Do you say that when you put them in these baskets, you're essentially saying they are not ready for food right now, and therefore I can't eat them? And that's a huktzah b'yadayim. Is that set aside actively from before Shabbos, and as such you can't take some? Or do we say no, they're edible? You put them there to enhance their state, to become more ripened, but they're ripe as it is. So Petzile Tamar Rabbi Shimon Mao, according to Rabbi Shimon, is that a huktzah b'yadayim? Is that something that you set aside actively and therefore a muktzah or not? Amalein muktzah Rabbi Shimon el grigros etzumukim bavad. No, it's not the same as grapes and dried figs, and therefore it doesn't have muktzah. As Rashi explains, you need a double point here. You need you actively set it aside as not usable for Shabbos. You want it to go through a process, and in the duration of that process, it's no longer edible. Grapes are edible fresh. Grapes are edible when they're raisins. But in the in-between stage, where they start drying out and shriveling, but they still have some juices in there, it's not really good. It's a shriveled grape, and is not really edible anymore. So it goes through a process that the fresh grape, which is edible, becomes not edible anymore until such time it's fully developed as a raisin, it's fully dried out as a raisin, and then it's edible again. And so you did two things. You set it aside actively as not using it, and during that time, it actually isn't good to use. Whereas in these dates, they're only getting better all the time. They may not be fully ripened yet, but when you harvested them and you put them in this wicker basket to continue becoming ripe, you're only making it better and better all the time. And so it only has the one part, you huktzah, b'yadayim, that you actively set it aside not to be eaten. You intend for it to ripen. But during that time, it's not inedible. It's not unusable. And therefore, that's not going to be a part of the muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. So that was Rebbe's explanation according to Rabbi Shimon. And now the Gemara is going to challenge, or going to question, wait, who does Rebbe follow? Rabbi Shimon, his son, is asking him, Rebbe, what's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in this type of muktzah? Indicating to us that he heard from his father, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that he follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and therefore he's asking whether this halacha applies even in these unripened dates. Well, is that really true? Does Rebbe follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, or does he follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? And we're going to try and prove that.
Is this similar to where we say if we have a kli that's become tamei and you have to break it, but once you've broken it apart, you can take the pieces and then use them for a different kind of kli? You're basically taking something that's usable, making it unusable before it becomes usable for something else.
Yeah, but in that unusable state, if that's the state it is in on Shabbos, is a muktzah. Like the broken vessel. Like the broken vessel. There's a question of whether there's a muktzah, as we've seen a little before, and we'll see more. You had a vessel that was an earthenware vessel. At the onset of Shabbos, it was a mug. And now it's broken and you have a shard, but that shard can still be used on Shabbos for a new or a semi-new usage. Is there going to be a muktzah on that? And we'll see if it has a similar usage, if it has a new usage, if it has no usage, whether muktzah applies or not. So that's not a bad comparison at all, John. Thank you. The concept of something that is in an intermediary state of muktzah. The distinction is that when something breaks on Shabbos and it lost its tumah status or whatever, that in between state, it changed on Shabbos from its usage. It's going to be different than what at the onset of Shabbos it was already a shard that I have as usage for something else. And we'll see more about broken vessels later. So the question is, according to Rebbe, does he follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon of muktzah, a limited muktzah or not? Vatanan, we learned, ein mashke v'shechem et borias, aval mashke v'shechem basis. On Yontif, which also has the laws of muktzah, obviously, you're allowed to shecht animals for food. What kind of animals are dedicated are non-muktzah and considered a part of your dedication for food? You've set them aside before Yontif for food. So the Mishnah says animals that are out in the field that are roaming free are not allowed to be used. Home animals, domesticated animals, are allowed to. So you can't just go catch some buffalo and shech them on Yontif. But your grazing cow, you're allowed to shech on Yontif. Well, the Brisa says, so what's the limit? How do you define what's considered a domesticated animal and what's not a domesticated animal? You can set out your herd and they could pasture for weeks on end. Are they not domesticated? So Vitanya, we learned Elohim Midbarius. What's included as a non-domesticated animal? They're out free. So anything that leaves in the spring and comes in the fall. So they're out the entire summer grazing on your land or government land, right? So then you're a rancher. You set your herd out in the spring. You bring them back in the fall. That would be animals that you cannot shecht on Yontif because they're out free. Beisos. What are home animals? Domesticated animals. Anything that goes out and pastures outside of the city bounds. However, but they come back in within the city bounds. Rebbe Omer, however, Rebbe has a much looser definition. Elu ve'elu basis, and he says, no, if you bring them home in the fall, that means that they are home domesticated animals, and you're allowed to shech them on Yontif. Ve'elehem idbarius. So what is defined as non-domesticated animals? Kol sharois ba'afa ve'enachnosas liyishuv. They pasture out in the swamps and fields and in the dust plains, but they don't come in to the city area, winter or summer. So now we see that Rebbe does have a concept of muktzah. That's not set aside as non-usable animals. It's simply that I haven't brought them home, and yet he's going to say it's going to be a muktzah concept. So So one answer, the Gemara says, no, that this is also similar to the concept of grapes becoming raisins. And Rashi explains. First of all, the fact that you sent them out to pasture on their own, that's a dachir b'yadayim. You've already actively made them no intent of using them, like the grapes that you put on the roof. But we said there's another caveat. Another point, that the grapes also in the duration of the time they're not usable until they become usable. Well, Rashi says this is also has that, but since it's so difficult to go and get them, but you sending them out and the difficulty of bringing it back in has this double point. You actively are not intending to use them because you set it aside, you sent them out into the field, and in the duration of time until they're going to be ready to be used, you can't use them either because they're not good to be eaten when they're in the middle of drying fruits, or these wild animal or these free roaming animals, because it's hard to bring them in during the time. And so it has a double point. You actively set it aside and you're not really able to use it during that time, so it's going to be a muktzah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. V'yiba yisema, or perhaps we can say, no, you're right, that Rebbe follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why he says that these free roaming animals are going to be muktzah and you can't shech them on yantiv. His son was only asking him it was a non-practical. He was asking him a halachic question. According to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, what would be the halacha? But of course, he doesn't follow that. He's asking him according to Rabbi Shimon, but he doesn't follow that opinion. Or a third way. Or perhaps, Rabbi, you're right, that the free roaming animals are still going to not be muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon because he doesn't have a set. It's not, even though he set it aside, it's usable during the time. He has to go and get it, but it's usable, and therefore it's not going to be muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. And Rebbe and his, as the son indicated in the question, follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. However, the first opinion in the price of the Chachamim, they follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda because they're saying that even semi-domesticated animals, such that they free roam during the summer and in the winter you bring them in the fall you bring them in, and nevertheless they're saying that counts as muktzah. To that, Rebbe says, look, I don't think it's muktzah in any case because I follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. But you are following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and say that there is a muktzah. Well, at least admit to me that an animal that comes home during the winter is a domesticated animal and I'm allowed to meshecht it. L'didi, Leslie muktzah klal. I don't follow the muktzah in such a scenario at all. L'didchu, you say that animals could be muktzah if you don't, because you set them aside and let them roam, and as such, they're not dedicated for use on yantif. Odeli mias, admit to me at least the basis that if they come home in the fall, at least that counts as a domesticated animal, and you're allowed to shecht it on yantif. The Rabbanan Amrle, and to that the Rabbanan would respond, no, those two are free roaming animals, and you may not shecht them on yantif. Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Halachik Rabbi Shimon. The statement Rabba Bar Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amru, they say the halach is like Rabbi Shimon. So at first the Gemara is going to learn and think that Rabbi Yochanan himself follows the opinion that of Rabbi Shimon. Omi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Achi. So the Gemara asks a question: is that true? Rabbi Yochanan follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that it has a very limited, narrow interpretation of muktzah. There was this elder either from Karuya or from Saruya asked Rabbi Yochanan, are you allowed to move a hen nest, a hen nesting spot on Shabbos? Amar le says no, it's only made for the chickens. You can't move it. So you see that it's muktzah. So you see that he follows a broader sense of muktzah. Says no, that's a narrow. Even Rabbi Shimon would agree there's a muktzah on account of that his particular scenario that this elder of Karuya or Saruya asked. It was talking about where there was a dead chick in that nest, and therefore there's nothing to do with it. You can't really give it to an animal to eat. It's obviously not human food, and so as such, it's muktzah. Gemara says, that would be okay according to the opinion of Rav. Some say it's the opinion of Rava. Either way, according to this opinion, that says that Rabbi Shimon would agree a dead animal that you did not intend before Shabbos for food is going to be muktzah. We'll see later that Rabbi Shimon says you're allowed to take meat from an animal that died in a vela. So you have a sheep in your backyard, or it was ill before Shabbos, and you knew that it may die, and it died on Shabbos. You're allowed to feed it to your animals. You have some dogs, you're allowed to feed it to your dog, and it's not muktzah. There, the reason is because at the onset of Shabbos, you were already thinking of it that it may be food because it was ill. But over here, you were hoping that these chicks would grow to be adult chickens. And as such, you did not think of it as food before Shabbos, and that's a form of setting it aside for non-usable. It has no use to you on Shabbos. And when it dies, so it's not food for your animals, and it's not food for the human, and as such, it's going to be a muktzah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. That's this one opinion. So according to that opinion, it makes sense that Rabbi Yochanan can still follow Rabbi Shimon, and at the same time say that this hen's nest is going to be muktzah. That according to this, the opinion of Marbarei Rabbi Yosef, who says that Rava says no, Rabbi Shimon did not agree that this is a muktzah, and because you can feed it to other animals, even though at the beginning of Shabbos you had no idea that it was going to die, and at the beginning of Shabbos you did not think of it as food. Still, you're allowed to. It's not muktzah. So what are you going to say about that? Well, perhaps it's talking about that this hen's nest had an egg in it. So what? It has an egg. What's going to be the muktzah of an egg? The muktzah of an egg is that it's a newly laid egg on Shabbos. It's something new, a new creation. Well, that's only going to be a muktzah according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Nachman had said that Rabbi Yehuda, who follows that there is a muktzah in a broad sense, says that also any new creation on Shabbos or Yom Tov is going to be muktzah. However, Rabbi Shimon, who has a narrow interpretation of muktzah, something that you huktzah b'yadayim, something that you set aside actively, a newly born item, something that's newly created on Shabbos is not going to be muktzah. And so why would Rabbi Yochanan say that there's a muktzah to a newly laid egg on Shabbos, and therefore he says you're not allowed to move the hen's nest? So the Gemara says the isbe beitzas afrach. No, it's talking about an egg that is already somewhat developing, and it has a chick in it, and that's not usable for anything. So that's more like that's really the same as an afrach is the same as a raisin. It's in the middle of a development process. It's not usable as an egg, and it's not usable as a chick because it's still in the midst of the development. He said, when Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef came from Eretz Yisrael, as we've talked about many times, Rabbi Yochanan was the head of the academy in Eretz Yisrael, and the students of Rabbi Yochanan would sometimes come to Bavel and tell over teachings. So when Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halachic Rabbi Yehuda, that the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda in a much broader sense of muktzah. Rabbi Shubin Levi Amar halachic Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shubin Levi said no, the halach is like Rabbi Shimon in the narrower sense. Amar Rabbi Yosef Haina de Amar Rabbi Bar Bachana Rabbi Yochanan Amar Amru halachic Rabbi Shimon. He says, oh, now I get it. When we quoted the statement of Rabbi Yochanan before that said that there is a muktzah, a limited sense of muktzah, and the halach is like Rabbi Shimon, it didn't say Rabbi Yochanan said, it said Amru. Rabbi Yochanan says that they say. Oh, that's what he meant. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with them, but he said there are those that say, being Rabbi Shubin Levi, they say that the halach is like Rabbi Shimon, but I don't agree. So Amru halacha Rabbi Shimon, that's why he says they said. Amru v'leila svirili. There are those that say it, but I disagree. Amalei Abai le Rabbi Yosef. So Abai said to Rabbi Yosef, "Ba'atle tizber de Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yehuda," and you don't agree to this statement of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yosef, who says that Rabbi Yochanan follows Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yosef, Ikli be Rabbi Abba de Min Haifa. Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Asi were students of Rabbi Yochanan, and they came to visit Rabbi Abba de Min Haifa. V'nafal menarta al galime, and a candelabra fell on his garment. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, since the fire is no longer lit, the candelabra can be lifted up by hand and taken off the garment. But he didn't do that. He just slid out the garment from beneath it and shifted off the candelabra from his garment. As we saw yesterday, this is a concept of tiltul min atzad. The movement is going to happen. The moving of the item is going to happen from the side, meaning he's picking up the garment that he wants, and it falls off by itself. But he didn't take it by hand. My time. What's the reason? Isn't it because Rabbi Asi is a student of Rabbi Yochanan? And Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda that a candelabra is going to be muktzah on Shabbos, even if it's not lit, and as opposed to Rabbi Shimon, who says it's only going to be muktzah during the time that the oil is still in there and it is lit on account of its dedication to the mitzvah, and the candelabra is the basis, is the stand for the muktzah item. Amar Lei said to him, Menarta kamras. No, you're talking about a candelabra. Menarta shining. That's different. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Rabasi, Horish Lakesh B'tzida, Menara, and he tells us, Biyade Achas Mutal Taltala B'shtei Yadayim Asal Taltala. The candelabra is really something different. Because if you can take it with one hand, so then it's a light candelabra, and as such, you don't have a set place for it. You can move it anywhere. It's going to be muktzah. It's not going to be muktzah. However, if it takes two hands to move it, Rabbi Rish Lakish says that's a heavy item. And once you put it down, that's where you mean to keep it. And that's essentially a huktzah b'yadayim. You set it aside because you have no intent of moving this because it's a heavy item. You put it on the top of the piano, you put it on top of the shelf, and that's where it remains. It's meant to remain there. And that's essentially setting it aside. And Rabbi Yochanan says, even a candelabra that you can move with one hand, you're going to essentially leave there. Amar anu elan ela b'ner ke Rabbi Shimon. We follow like Rabbi Shimon. Aval menorah, even though we follow Rabbi Shimon, bein nitla b'yadav achas, bein nitla b'shtei yadayim, asal taltala. A candelabra is going to be prohibited to be moved, whether it's a light candelabra that you can handle with one hand or with two hands. V'taim amai. And what's the reason? Because once you put it somewhere, you set that as its place, and it remains there essentially forever. Of course, you may move it at times, but it's set in its place. It's meant to remain there. That's its dedicated place, and that counts as a huktzah b'yadayim. You set it aside. That's where it's going to be. You actively put it aside for one to remain in one spot, and only for one use, as a candelabra. You're not going to pick it up and use it as a paperweight. You're not going to pick it up and use it as something else. And therefore, it has the concepts that Rabbi Shimon would have said, which is that you set it aside actively and have no use during that time other than its use, which is to light candles, which you can't do on Shabbos. And therefore, it is a huktzah b'yadayim. It is active put aside. And it's going to count as a muktzah. So what we have here is the concepts of muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon, which are that it needs to be set aside by hand, but actively set aside and not usable during the time that you set it aside. And the machlokes over here is, does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi follow that opinion? Does Rabbi Yochanan follow that opinion? And we're going to continue with the concepts of of the candelabra tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem.